In Gujarat, India, exists the land feature known as Mount Girnar. According to Jainism, it is believed to be the location where the next 24 Tirthankars will obtain nirvana. Standing at 3,672 feet, Mount Girnar is covered with over 800 Hindu and Jain temples that are spread across its summit. In order to reach the final summit, one has to climb 9,999 steps. Diwali, a festival of lights, is held yearly and celebrated by Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs. The festival symbolizes the spiritual victory of light over darkness, good over evil, and knowledge over ignorance. At Mount Girnar, every year during the Dev Diwali, thousands of people circumambulate a 38-kilometer route around the mountain, walking clockwise. The road taken through the forest is only open 5 to 10 days during parikrama. Pilgrims are not all that wrap around the mountain. Linear features are present in the local terrain. Surrounding the mountain is a hexagonal pattern of linear features. While the mountain shows 6 sides, its topography tells a different story. The topographical map of Mount Girnar shows 4 sides surrounding the mountain. And when we zoom out further, we see a band wrapping around the mountain. This leads to the question of what might have caused this. In the Bhagavata Purana, the king of the Silwa kingdom is said to have had a high-tech aerial vehicle crafted for the purpose of destroying the city of Dwarka and to kill his hated enemy, Lord Krishna. The flying vehicle named Salba, made of iron, was constructed by Maya Danava and presented to the king of Salwa. Upon his attacking Dwarka, a fierce vortex is said to have arose, blanketing the area with billowing dust. After the attack on Dwarka, meaning gateway to heaven, Krishna was able to take out the Vimana, but not before the city could be lost to the ocean. Afterwards, Krishna is mistaken for a deer and shot in the foot and fatally injured, and so was said to begin the Kali Yuga. Today, ancient Dwarka is thought to have been sunk off the western coast of India. The city is described as being built on a lake, having bridge entries and a port entry. It has been described as further being built on 6 pillars or mounds, 2 on the right and 4 on the left. Underwater ruins have been found by modern Dwarka, but none matching details of the Mahabharata, where the city had 900,000 royal palaces composed of silver, gold, and gems. In the Mausula Parva, Arjuna describes the submergence of Dwarka as follows. The sea, which had been beating against the shores, suddenly broke the boundary that was imposed on it by nature. The sea rushed into the city. It coursed through the streets of the beautiful city. The sea covered up everything in the city. I saw the beautiful buildings become submerged one by one. In a matter of a few moments, it was all over. The sea had now become as placid as a lake. There was no trace of the city. Dwarka was just a name, just a memory. With color-shaded relief of bathymetric data, we can see there is a region matching geological description of ancient Dwarka. More, there is a seamount chain having a golden ratio phi spiral curvature to the west of the location. While the golden ratio is commonly in nature in plants and other living beings, arcs on the surface of the earth tend to be results of longitudinal propagation of waves rather than having a phi ratio curvature. This is indicative of a spiraling energy in the formation of the seamount chain and not a longitudinally propagating wave. Globally, there are countless examples of formations being created by waves moving longitudinally. Island arcs such as in the Caribbean, the whole of the Ring of Fire, the Indonesian archipelago, and the Scotia Arc, all were formed by longitudinally propagating waves. Continents experienced these forces as well in the forming of mountains such as the Appalachians and Himalayas. Across the world, arcs are of this dimension, atoms pushing atoms. Yet the phi ratio arc of the Arabian Sea seamount chain distinctly requires a spiraling energy of a vortex, and a fierce one at that, to produce it. With such a distinct feature, the vortex must have rapidly lost energy. In other words, a spontaneous discharge of the energy of the vortex would have to be released from the system to the Earth. The vortex of such a system could allow an abundance of ether particles in so as to even created a detectable nucleus. Evidence shows that the region of Gujarat, India, is highly scarred with not only anomalous currents, as if an otherworldly lightning storm passed through the area, but even a trail is visible. The nucleus of the system appears to have left behind a depressed and scorched land. If the nucleus passed over land, it could have gouged the land with its downward flowing wind and energy, creating the Gulf of Kunch and the Gulf of Kambat. If the land was sufficiently hardened, then it would stay intact and instead be heated. The scorched trail leads southward until it reaches what appears as a lightning strike on the ground. Surrounding this feature is a border, as if the flow of energy of such a lightning strike pushed mountains around its edge. A lightning imprint pointing directly at the most defined point of the hexagon surrounding Mount Girnar. Mount Girnar is an intrusion considered to have formed about 1 to 2 million years ago in the plains of Kathiawar in the midst of the Deccan Traps. Indeed, the Deccan Traps appear to exist in the region that the vortex of the storm occupied. This can be inferred from the length of the seamount chain. While the nucleus traveled over a focused location, the bands of the storm would have moved above the land. The Deccan Traps are a large igneous province of west-central India. It is one of the largest volcanic features on Earth. seen as a large shield volcano. It is composed of solidified flood basalt layers considered to be the result of a giant volcanic eruption over a large area. The Deccan Traps are more than 2,000 meters thick and covering an area of 500,000 square kilometers. While the nucleus would have been most energetic, a region of subtle particles in such abundance so as to be capable of creating a void of atoms, thus allowing the most cosmic energy through to the surface of the planet, its bands would have allowed cosmic flows into the region below the storm, which could produce a large flood basalt on the earth below. The traps are considered to have erupted in phases, as bands of a sufficient storm could induce across a period of 700,000 years, around 66 million years ago. It is worth noting, radiometric dating relies on constant decay rates to determine an age. However, it has been shown that decay rates are seasonally dependent and therefore are only useful as relative ages rather than absolute ages when comparing to modern rates of decay. If we allow for the time of absolute ages to be contracted while maintaining the sequence of events as suggested by radiometric dating, the connection of these anomalies with Deccan Traps leads us all the way to the other side of the Earth. Occurring in the same period, the Chicxulub crater has been considered as a possible cause of the Deccan Traps. However, the evidence strongly suggests the Deccan Traps began before the formation of the crater. The two formations on Earth are frequently considered together to determine if they may be linked due to their relative nearness in time and somewhat antipodal positions, being about 5,000 kilometers from it. Importantly, in the times of Dwarka, the Earth had yet to expand. While plate tectonics is generally described as the process under which Earth functions, it assumes the existence of an ocean as the remaining surface area of the planet having a single continent when Pangaea existed. However, this is not the case. The Earth expanded. All continents were one single landmass, fully joined, making up the totality of the surface area of the Earth. While it is difficult to remap exactly how the Earth was prior to expansion, a pre-expansion Earth brings the Deccan Traps and Chicxulub closer towards antipodal positions. The expansion of the Earth occurred when sufficient activation energy was present for the Earth to react. The Yucatan Peninsula was positioned in the region of Chile and Peru. The flow of ether from the storm was funneled through the storm, through the Earth, and out the other side of the planet. As a result, it applied an outward pressure on the crust on the opposite side of Earth. And the Earth, under extreme stress from internal pressure building up, began to fracture. This was apparent first along the Mediterranean, as can be seen from the oceanic crustal age. As the fracture ripped through the Earth, it sent shock waves into the edges of continental shelf in the direction of propagation. When the fracture reached the energetic antipode, the Earth exploded. We can follow the evidence to see that this is the case. Firstly, we use the oceanic crustal age to get a feel for the sequence of the process. As can be seen, the oldest oceanic crust is in the Mediterranean, then being between North America and Africa, which means the fracture moved in this direction. Turning to maps of the Earth, when the fracture moved westward along the Mediterranean, it was also generally turning as it deflected energy into the land along the right side of the fracture's travel. This pushed up the Alps and the Appalachian Mountains, while there was no Atlantic Ocean yet formed. This is evident in the mountains throughout, but especially in the Appalachians, where the shock wave of energy was so immense that it even caused a second wave to form south of the mountain chain. As can be seen, the topography of the terrain is not nearly as influenced along the African side as in Europe and North America. Only along the fracture length where energy was sent in both directions. This led to a major expulsion of magma from the fracture in the Earth, today known as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. The Earth was still a single landmass, but with gaping fractures forming that allowed magma to begin to seep across the surface of a large swath of land. Then the fracture appears to have ran into resistance from the sheer landmass of Africa, and the wave of energy propagating deflected off of it. It rapidly turned instead between North America and South America towards the weak point of the Earth, where a vortex of ethereal energy was flowing and pressuring outward on the crust of the Earth. When it reached the location, the crust gave way and exploded violently. This explosion pushed up the Andes Mountains, applying force into South America, which was still connected to Africa. North America and Central America ripped away from South America. The vortex of this ether storm entering the Earth, traveling in a clockwise direction as evidenced by the seamount chain, passed through the Earth and exited the opposite side as a counterclockwise rotation. When Central America was separated, it broke free with torque. The spiral vortex of the ether storm caused the crust to rotate, and as it fractured apart, it was caused to whip in a counterclockwise direction. This caused Central America to apply a pressure to the western coast of South America. Mountains from Ecuador through Venezuela were created by the force of this torque. As can be seen, the mountain chains in this region move in step-by-step angles that are related to the thickness of the continent across its width in the location. This suggests that the explosion was enough to cause all remaining fracturing to rapidly be induced, since if South America were still attached to Africa, the resulting mountain chain would not mimic the width of the continent. As the torque brought Central America past the top of South America, material was sent into the newly developing ocean beds, and islands formed of both continental shelf and newly formed material were created. Evidence has further shown that even the Deccan traps experienced clockwise, counterclockwise rotation. When the crust of the Earth ruptured, the force of energy being expelled flowed in a manner where it deflected from the mass of South America, Africa, and Asia, and instead the energy ballooned into the region of the Pacific Ocean with a large round anomaly of older oceanic crust. The energy sent the region of Australia southward as if surfing a wave as it ripped the continents apart. Debris and smaller segments of detached continental shelf from the explosive eruption of the Earth's surface were sent along the fracture, reshaping it into islands of Southeast Asia as it spilled out across the newly forming ocean bed. Then it released magma from its fault lines and continued to expand the radius of the Earth until internal pressure and external pressure were at equilibrium. Comparatively, the process reached a new steady state, which occurred in a relatively short transitional time, alike to as described in ancestral narratives. Tektites occur around locations such as Chicxulub. Interpreting Chicxulub as an impact site requires these particles to leave the atmosphere and enter the vacuum of space and return to Earth to obtain the internal vacuum. However, if they went out of the atmosphere in order to obtain their vacuum, they would not be found centrally located at the crater, but instead offset from it elsewhere by a distance. Rather, tektites obtained their stable vacuum nuclei by the ethereal vortex storm that was flowing through the Earth. Because ether particles are so subtle relative to the atoms that the Earth's crust and mantle are composed of, they are able to pass through it easily. Normally, the layers of atoms that naturally and organically develop one upon another form stable equilibriums, and so each successive layer blocks portions of ethereal flows by absorbing their relative spectrum of ether. Layers of dense particles pass through the resistance of subtler layers and each find their equilibrium across time. However, the weapon used on Dwarka focused the ethereal energy through the layers by producing a vortex capable of forming macroscopic regions void of atoms but filled with ether particles. And so as the ethereal particles passed through the Earth, they formed an abundance of stable macroscopic void particles, tektites, containing stored pure ether within a shell of orbiting material. Tektites take shapes indicative of vortex rotation. This suggests that the Chicxulub crater is rather an internal impact from an ethereal particle so massive that it caused the Earth to rupture. Central America then was moved aside by the overall force as the projection of ethereal vortex energy emitted tektites in large quantities. They then showered down over the region of Southeast Asia and Australia. Antimatter is time-reversed particles. When the direction of time is in the opposite direction, a stable vacuum particle can be seen as a radiant star. Systems which we see as matter take in ethereal particles and merge them, and then re-emit them as larger scale particles which we see as light. Vacuum particles, rather, take in larger surrounding systems and break them down into subtler particles and emit the subtler particles. In this way, they are identical but dependent on our angle of perception. With the rupturing of the Pacific, energy exploded in all directions. Where it met the resistance of continental shelves, it was reflected back. However, because of the intensity of the event, the reflecting waves brought large quantities of material with them. This led to island arcs especially found along the eastern coast of Asia, where the energy flowed most. Running along the eastern coast of Asia is the north-south gravity lineament, marking the eastern boundary where the thickness of the continental crust is dramatically reduced, showing how far the energy was able to penetrate into the continental shelf from the explosive force. As the Pacific Ocean was spreading, ripples of energy accumulated in corners and deposited material. The Hawaiian island chain formed because of the meeting of the arcs between North America and Asia. Material was deposited in the largest quantities initially and then pushed aside by newly entering material. This caused an island chain to be emitted. As the Earth expanded, the continents spreading apart collided on the opposing side in a manner where the pattern abruptly shifts. As the chain of islands were created successively, each nucleus was formed with less and less material. Further evidence of this process can be found from the sedimentation. As the earth ruptured, especially between North America and Africa, not only was magma released, but large quantities of water and other material. The sediment shows that water flowed out across North America as the earth rotated until it reached the newly formed Rocky Mountains, pushed up from a collision of forces from the Pacific and Atlantic sides like waves colliding. Then it largely flowed along the Rockies and around Alaska, but the waters accumulated. As they swept across to Asia, they were caused to flow southward and outward on the spinning globe. This caused such a great flow of water as to press down upon the land as it moved, which then pushed up a large sweeping mound of material into an arc of mountains known as the Himalayas. The energy from this wave collided with still active energies from the formation of the Indonesian archipelago, causing the Himalayas mountain chain to fracture. Water and mountains spilled down across the terrain from this location. Such vast sums of water were involved in the formation of the Himalayas that they also were caused to flow outward and around the western side of the mountain chain. This flow traveled out across the Middle East. As the water progressed, it was depositing nutrients along the way. That is, until it largely ran out of them and contained more and more sand. Silicon and oxygen make up 75% of the weight of the Earth's crust. This left behind a trail of highly fertile land in North America and northern Russia, but as the material reached the region of the Himalayas, the remains became highly sandy to the point that deserts were deposited. The water that reached northern Africa, sweeping across it, was the last stretch of the journey before assuredly draining into the Atlantic Ocean. This deposited material at the drainage points into the ocean in such quantities as to produce the Canary Islands and Cape Verde. The mantle is like the material surrounding the tektite's vacuum center. At the core of the Earth is not a single object, but rather an array of dense systems orbiting one another in a tight nucleus held together by their proximity and identical in nature to the nucleus of an atom. We can peer into the core of a large stellar object by looking at the center of a galaxy. While black holes are considered to be singularities, the stars at the center of a galaxy are the black hole's nucleus, and the X-ray emissions considered to be from the surroundings of the black hole are from the mantle equivalent of the object. They are so large in radius that we peer through them when looking for them. The density of their particles is so high that visible light can pass through the system, and as a result, we can see the nucleus of the Milky Way. When a jolt of energy flows through the stars, their arrangement momentarily has an ordered structure with a burst of hexagonal connections between adjacent stars. When the ethereal vortex entered the core of the Earth, the nucleus of the Earth was caused to undergo radioactive decay. As the Earth ruptured from the ethereal vortex on one side of the planet, an equal and opposite force occurred, causing a projection of positive energy in a vortex in the opposing direction. This flowed to the surface of the Earth, where the storm was discharging through a channel that projected in spiraling energy, transforming the atoms to different materials, and became Mount Girnar. The path of the storm appearing even to orbit the location calling forth the burst of positive energy vortices to create the mountain. This can be determined from the pole of Saturn, where a hexagon is formed in the planet's rotating atmosphere. Not only is Mount Girnar encompassed by a hexagon, but is made up of many hexagonal formations. Also known as Revata Giri, Revata having the root Sanskrit meaning of brilliant and Giri of mountain, as well as Ujjayanta Giri, where Ujjayanta means temple in Sanskrit. If we inspect the Deccan traps more closely, they do not really look traditionally volcanic at all. The nearest hotspot under Réunion, claimed to be the cause of the Deccan traps, is disputed on whether there is any relationship between the two at all. Instead, they have similar hexagonal features and are of the same nature but of a lesser magnitude. It is as if all of the Deccan traps are the galactic disk of the galaxy having Mount Girnar as the nucleus, and so they carry a frozen imprint of the current that was flowing through the region like a current in the ocean. The hexagonal connections of the event are also present along the coast of South America and in the Hawaiian island chain. This indicates that the Earth has larger systems as part of its constituents, which are nodes of the Platonic solid coordinate system of the Earth. When the Earth ruptured, Mount Girnar and Chicxulub were antipodal. Chicxulub was positioned off the western coast of South America. By looking at present coordinates, we find a pattern emerges. The approximate coordinates of the following locations are Mount Girnar, 21.5 degrees north, 70.5 degrees east. Chicxulub, 21.5 degrees north, 90 degrees west. The South American hexagonal corner, 21.5 degrees south, 70.5 degrees west. Mount Girnar's current antipode, Easter Island, 23.9 degrees south, 109 degrees west. Eye of Sahara, 21.1 degrees north, 11.4 degrees east. This shows us that when the resonance of a system is changed, it can pass through a transitional chaotic phase to reach a new equilibrium. This shows that the Earth underwent a similar process where its resonance was changed. This repeating value of 21.5 degrees has been associated with the golden ratio point of the Earth, which has been claimed to be Mecca. Mecca too has coordinates of 21.5 degrees north and 39.8 degrees east. Approximately at Mount Girnar's present antipode, as if the cosmic energies that were channeled focusedly through the mountain and down into the center of the Earth and out the other side, were so strong as to push up islands on the surface. Remote islands of Rapa Nui are found. On the island are moai statues. Some stand in lines, casting shadows that appear as waves depicting the waves of energy that the Earth released. Others showing our descent into darkness, from awareness to ignorance. Yet all waves oscillate. The storm, upon discharging into the Earth, was ejected as a more stable system from the surface of the planet. However, it appears to have remained as a stable ethereal vacuum particle orbiting the Earth as the South Atlantic anomaly. As it moves westward, it is moving to an antipodal position to where the magnetic poles appear to be converging. This demonstrates that the process of a pole shift involves an emergence of a new pole and a convergence of the present poles as one, while the South Atlantic anomaly will become one of the poles. The convergence of our present poles will occur at the counter location on the planet, at the location where a vortex of positive energy was emitted, providing a channel for the positive energy outflow to vent from the Earth. Mount Girnar. And as Dwarka was the gateway to heaven, Mount Girnar is the mountain from heaven.